You see my screen now, the slides? Okay, good, thank you. So welcome to Code with Sally on Tuesdays. We run the session every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We have the YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch the videos, or the blog if you want to have more reading about the topics we cover. There is a blog coming soon for the loops, but it's not out yet. I will announce it once it's ready. Last time we covered the first half of the loops. We discussed when to use the while and when to use the do whiles as well. Anyone with questions about the previous topic for the while and do while before moving forward? I don't see questions here. And I don't see questions on the chat. Okay, we'll go ahead and continue with the rest. Today, we'll go for the for loop section. We'll cover the traditional loops. Even though we didn't discuss the list or the sets in depth, those are the collections. It's complex data type. In Salesforce, we covered so far the primitive, but I will explain them quickly as much as I can and show you how we can use the iterations for now. And we'll see as well the SOQL. Maybe some people are familiar with. As admins, sometimes you write SOQL statements. If not, I would just give you an idea what are the SOQL and see how we can use it for the for loops. Anytime if you have questions, stop me, ask me. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and I know Jade is on the call, so if I miss the question, she will let me know as well. Okay, so the first type of data type of loops we are covering today is the traditional for loops. So the traditional for loops are very popular, and last time we talked about the usage of the loops. The loops are important because they let you repeat a certain set of code or statements over and over again, depending on the need. And we saw with the while, we check the condition first, and then if the condition is true, we do the code. With the do while, we go at least run the code first, and then at the end, we check if the condition is true, we run it again. So in that terms, the while and the do while, we didn't know exactly how many times we want to run it, the code for or repeat it. So that's why we were relying more on a condition to be evaluated to true or false. With the traditional for loops, it's used a lot, and it's very essential to understand it. But it's used mainly when you know the number of iterations you want to run your code for. And it consists of three main sections. We will have, that's a flow chart to show you how it works, like we saw that with the while and do while. But for the for loop, we have the traditional for loops, we have three main sections. One is we initialize a counter. Then we check if the condition is true. We run the code between the curly brackets. And then we update the loop counter and check the condition again and keep going over and over again until the condition is evaluated to false. So you will find in the for loop, we have three main sections or three main component: initialization, condition, and updating the loop counter. It can be incrementing or decrementing. It depends on what you want to do. So ideally, use the traditional for loops when you know how many times you want to run your code for. The while, it was based on a condition. We don't know 3 times or 4 times or how many times we want to do it. Here, we would know the number or how many times we want to run our code for. For the syntax of the traditional for loop, you will find that we always start with the keyword for, and then we have the initialization. And if you remember, when we were talking about variables, initialization means you declare a variable and you set a default value for it. So we initialize a variable here. Then we do the condition we want to check, and then the increment or the update of the variable. It doesn't have to be an increment. It can be a decrement. It can be an increment with 2, 3. It depends on what you want to achieve. Usually it's increment by 1 or decrement by 1, but some cases in some other scenarios you want to do things differently. So that's the main idea of how the syntax would be. We want to go through an example here and explain it together. So for anyone who's joining new, I was recommending either you have a developer org that you can use and try to run the code that we have here in the session offline, so you can play with it and get sense of how it's working and try, because listening only to the session won't be useful. You need to have hands-on. Or if you want to have a trailhead, if that's easier for you, you can have a trailhead playground and work with it as well. For now, we are using the developer console. So you go to the gear when you log into your org and you open the developer console. I have it here in new tab. Another thing we said it's useful if you could all try to download the Visual Studio Code, because at some point when we are going through the sessions, we'll switch from using the developer console and we'll focus more on using the Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's go here. We said that the syntax, I will open the debug and execute anonymous. We said the syntax is for, which is the keyword. Then we said here, it's initialization. And we said here, we have a condition. And then we had here, update the condition or increment, decrement, and then between the curly brackets, and we always say if you open a bracket, close it so you don't miss closing one by any chance. And here the code when the condition is true. So let's say here what we want to do in this example, we want to print numbers from 0 to 5. So in that case, for the initialization, I will define an initialize, I would declare and initialize a variable of type integer. And I would say it's I or index, whatever is easier for you. And that's where, like usually, I don't recommend naming a variable with just I, X, Z, but usually when we do the traditional for loop, that's where we go with I, J in one letter, because it's just lives for the for loop and we are not using it anywhere. But feel free as well if you want to name it something else like index or loop one index or whatever makes it more easier for you to understand. So here, that's the initialization for me. I want to start with a 0, so I know it's start with 0. And then the condition, that's when I want to stop. So I will say here, I is less than 6. That's when I don't want the code within the 2 brackets to be executed. And then here the increment would be I plus plus. I plus plus means is the same as if I said I equal I plus 1. That means take the value of I, which is starting with 0, and add 1 to it and use it. So for short, we do I plus plus. And here the code, because I want to print, so the print for us would be system dot debug, and here number value, and that's how we do strings between single quotes, and we do concatenation. And then I print the I for me here, which will be at the first, it will be I. So how this is executed, the initialization will happen only once before the for loop or the code here gets executed. So the I will be initialized once by 0. So the starting point for it is 0. And then it will go and check, is the I, which is 0, less than 6, it will evaluate to true. So it will execute the code within the curly brackets. So we'll print the value, which will print 0 here. And then it will increment the I with 1. So that will be the second time 1. So it will go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now when we go to the 6, it will be 6 less than 6. It will evaluate to false, so it will go out. Let's execute it and see how it will behave and what we'll see in the debug statement. So when we run in the execute anonymous, I usually check here open log to open the log for me after running and hit execute. It will execute my code, will open the log for me, and then I choose debug only to see only my statements. Then here, the result we were expecting. Here we'll have the statements will run from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when it will go to the 6, it will check that it's not less than 6, so it will stop running. Let's say I wanted here to print only the first 2. Anyone can tell me what I need to change? If I wanted just to print from 0 to 2 instead of from 0 to 5. Any ideas?
The condition is 3.
Yes, exactly. So I do here, that means it will go show 0, then it will print it, then I will go to 1, it will be less than 3, it will print it to the same, and then when I will go to 3, it will be not less than 3 and it will stop. So let's execute it. Now it's 0, 1, 2. So another question. Now we are printing here this one from 0 to 2. Let me put it for you here. What if I wanted to print from 1 to 6? What should I do? What changes I need to do in my for loop?
Change the initialization to 1 and the condition to less than 7.
Okay. Yes, that's great because I want to start from 1 here. So I will start with my initialization with that. And let's execute it. So I have here from 1 till 6. That's exactly what we wanted to do. Something else, because sometimes it's easier for you when you are coding, you can do less than or equal 6. And it will do the same from 1 to 6. So it depends on your preference. You can do less than 7. So you put a condition where it will be evaluated to false, it will go out, or you can put the last one, like you want to keep going until it's as long as it's smaller than or equal 6. So both of them are will give you the same output. So that means I just wanted to play with the values so you know that you don't have to always start with index 0. And you don't have always to have a specific number here. It depends on what you want to do. Let's say I want to start print 0, 2, 4, 6, for example. What can I change here? The initialization. Should I start with 1 or 0?
0.
Yeah.
Yes, 0, because that's the first number. Then my condition, I want to stop until it's smaller than 7, which is right because the maximum I want to show is 6. Now for the increment, do I want to always increment by 1?
No.
What should I do? Increment by?
+2.
Yeah.
Plus
So
equals 2. Now, can I ask you about the 7? If you put minus or equal 6, it will still do the same, right?
what minus?
Where if we go into the 6 number and we
Yeah.
put minus or equals 6, it will do the same.
Yeah.
Uh,
Initialization with 7.
yeah, I can do less than or equal 6 here.
Okay, so it's not like okay.
So that
It's a preferred
means
method for the.
no, like I'm not aware of a preference like in best practices that tells you which one to use, but it's more what makes it more easier for you to read. Like here you would say that as long as the I is less than or equal 6, I want to print. The other one is as long as the I is less than 7. So whichever is easier for you. Here the increment I did I equal I plus 2. So let's execute it. And let's see here. I see 0, 2, 4, and 6. So here, that's why here I like this area, it depends on what you want to do. Let's say I wanted to print a sequence of numbers, skipping by 3, skipping by 6. So that will do that for me. The condition is the one that stops me from going forever. And that's why you need to make sure, like if you remember when we spoke about the while and the do while, one of the most important things is to make sure that you are not having an infinite loop. Because if, for example, I don't do anything here, like if I do I, so that means the I will be the same, will be 0 forever. It will give you an exception. So you need to do to make sure that you are doing something to break the loop for you. Another example, we saw here how we are incrementing. Let's see how we can decrement. So I want to print a countdown instead of like a countdown. That means I want to print 10, 9, 8, and so on until I reach 1. In that case, if I will start here, the initialization, what's the first number for me here?
10.
10. So that's my starting point. And the condition in that case, when I would stop? I want to print until it's 1.
I greater than 1. Greater than or
1.
equal to 1. Equal to 1.
Equals
1. Okay.
Greater than or
Equals
equal to 1.
And for the here for the final piece, like we saw how to do increment and increment by 2 and stuff. Like here, what do I do?
I minus minus.
I minus minus. So it's I minus minus is like I'm doing I equal I minus 1. So it's the same, it just we do it like that, faster, like or like shorter. And let's print it here and see it. And I will print here the I. And let's see it live together.
Check your spelling. Whoops.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. System. Yeah. Anything else? No, right? Let's see. And the debug will show me from 10 till 1, and then it stopped. So again, it's another way to think about it that you can do increment, decrement. It depends on your use case and when you are working with it, what you need to do. There is no like that how you have to do it. It just you need to know the different areas and how it gets processed. Another example that I want to show you, I'll bring it here and explain it to you. I want to do a nested for loops, and I want to do multiplication table. So the first for loop for me will be, let me get the code here so we can explain it. So multiplication table of like until 5 multiplied by 5. Table of 5, like from 1 till 5. So the first for loop, I did here a regular one. I did the initialization by 1, and I will continue until it's less than or equal 5, and I will exit. So that's the same as what we did before, right? I'm saying I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I want to have a row just to show the multiplication table for me. The first time I want to multiply 1 multiplied by 1. The second time, because in the ones table now, I want to show 1 multiplied by 2. The third time I want 1 multiplied by 3, and so on. So that's why we did a second for loop that we call it J here. And we'll start from 1 and we'll go until 5 as well. And here, just for printing, I'm saying row plus, I add the string for it. And string.value, we learned about the primitive data type and their methods. This is one of the methods. And I multiply by J, and I add it to my string. And then I print the row. So what is happening here, that I will stay 1 until I multiply it once with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After this is done, because the loop will exit when it's 6, I will go and increment the I again. I will go and increment the I, so it will be, instead of 1, it will be 2, and it will remain fixed. And I will go here, loop, oh, sorry. I will loop 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 2 multiplied by 1, 2 multiplied by 2, and so on. And third time, I will increment the I. Any issues with that syntax? With the nested for loops? Okay, let's see it. Let me execute it here. You'll find here that for row of 1, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For table of 2, it's 2. 2 multiplied by 1 is 2. 2 multiplied by 2 is 4, and so on. Same for the 3s, 4s, and 5s. So I printed the multiplication table from 1 to 5. And that's it. Like, I want to print just the, if here, let's say I wanted to do the multiplication table, I don't want to stop by 5, and I want to print until the 9th. So in that case, I will change the J here to be less than or equal 9, and I will keep this same. So that will give me the multiplication table that for table of, like, for the ones from 1 multiplied by 1 to 1 multiplied by 9, and so on until I reach the 5 multiplied by 1 until 5 multiplied by 9. So that's how you can play with the nested for loops. Sometimes it's you will find yourself in a position that you want to do it. So it's good to know that sometimes you have, let's say, first looping on the accounts, and for each account, I loop for the opportunities after that. So you may have nested for loop. So it's a good idea to know how to work with it. Again, usually we use a single letter with the for loop, but if that would be confusing, and for example, you want to say account index or opportunity index, you can go for it for sure. Any questions about the nested for loops? I don't think there is questions in the chat. So I think we are good. Okay, let me paste that here. I did already. Yes, I did. Okay, so let's go back. So here I had a sample that I wanted to show you, and that's the one we started with. We explained that the initialization here I have 0. And if you remember, we talked about initialization and declaration, so it's good to connect the dots together. And we have here less than 5 and the plus plus. Here we initialize the I to 0. This will happen only once. And if you remember here, the initialization is before checking the condition or anything. So it happens only once. Then we'll check that the I is less than 5. This is the condition. It will be true. We'll do the code. Then we'll do the I++, and we check again until we get out the loop. That's mainly the traditional for loop. We'll move to the next type, which is iterating over the list and sets. If you have any questions, let me know before we start the new type. I think we are good. Okay. The iteration for list and sets, as I said, like we covered before the primitive data types. The primitive data types are the simplest, like they contain one value. This value can be date, can be an integer, can be a string, but it's a single value. We have lists and sets, and that's part of the collections, and we'll talk about them more in depth. But just assume that we have a single variable that contains the list of the attendees in the session, and we keep the list in the order that they joined the session. So I joined first, and then Adam joined second, Daniel, and then we have another guest whose name is Adam. So we have in this position 3, and then Dina in position 4. And the list is usually the index is starting from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't start from 1. And as you can see, that's the main criteria of the list. It's an order collection. So we know their order or they have an index. I can go and say, get me the name in index 2. I can go and grab it and come back. That's the main criteria of lists. And the other criteria that you can see here, we have Adam twice. It doesn't throw an exception or stop you from having duplicates values. The sets, on the other hand, they don't have an order. You cannot go and say, get me something at that index. But the benefit of it is that you will have unique. I can say, okay, yes, I have 4 attendees or 5 attendees. I want to get the unique names from the list. So that would be in a set. The set doesn't allow duplicates, and it's not ordered, but it has unique elements. That's briefly. And for Apex, this whole big rectangle is a list. So it's one variable that will contain all 4 or 5 together. Here, for this set, again, the whole big rectangle is one variable of type set of strings will be in Apex. So that's just to give you an idea. It's more complex than just the primitive data types. It doesn't have a single value. It has multiple values, whether it's ordered or restrict uniqueness or not. And for the sets and lists, because we have a lot of usage for them, there is a type of we can iterate on their elements item by item. I can print the names. So the syntax for it will be, you will have the same for keyword. Between brackets here, we open and close, you will have the data type, because as we said, those are complex. Here in this example, they are a list of strings or a set of strings. We can have another list that holds the age of attendees, each of them, or another set that have the salaries. So of each role, like technical architect, developer, senior. So it can be string, integer, it can be of any data type of the primitive data types and beyond that as well. But here, when we do the for, we define that here, this is the data type of each item that we have in the list or set, and we give a name that we can use within the code, and then colon in our list or set name, and then between the curly bracket, we do the action. And what is happening, that means that I will go once, get me Sally and do something, then get me Adam and do something, then get me Daniel and do something. So it depends on your list and what you need to do. And let's see an example here. I prepared a list for you so you can see it in action. Let me clear that and put this here. I prepared here a list and we'll learn more about it. But here, as we have like string or integer or decimal, so we have here, because we are defining a list data type, we less than, and then we put the data type of each item that will be in the list will be string, and then close it here. And then we give a variable, as we do with the variables, we give a name. And this is how we are initializing our list. We do a new list, the same data type, and we open curly bracket and we put strings, comma separated. And as we know from the string primitive data type, they have to be in single quotes. So we add them here. And then I want to print it. So that's how we will do our for loop. So we set the for loop, and let me put it here at the top. We said it's for data type variable name, and here the collection. That's the syntax that we saw in the slide. So the data type for me here is the string, because this list is a list of strings. If it was a list of integer, it would be an integer. If it was a list of decimal, it would be a list of decimal, or the data type here decimal. So I have the data type here string. Then I give it the name. I want here to give each item that I would get out a name so I can use it. So we give here the variable, it's a fruit, and then colon and the collection name. And my collection name here is fruits. So I have it here, and close the bracket, and we open and close the curly bracket where we'll have our code, and we print it here. We print each item. So let's execute it and see it. Here we have, we have the first fruit was apple, the second fruit was banana, the third fruit is cherry. So that's how you can loop item by item. I could do the same with the other for loop. I could say integer I equals 0, because with list, we know that the list is ordered and we have index. And here I would say less than fruits dot length dot size dot size, and here I plus plus. So that means I will start with 0, and fruit dot size, it's need a checklist, Apex methods. And you will find here the same with the integer or decimal, or they have their methods, and you can go through them and read, like it has clone, clear, get from a certain index, and so on. And there is the size. This is the one that I'm using. I'm just showing to you how to read the documentation. So the size here tells you that it returns the number of of elements in the list. So that's why I'm using, because if it tells me here I have 3, so as if I'm saying I less than 3. So I less than 3, that means it will go to 0, 1, and 2 and stops, because we have the index starting from 0 and the size is the 3. So it's as if I'm saying stop until the I is less than 3, or continue until that. And I can print it here. The printing will be different. When I do that, I do fruits and square bracket of I. So that means I want to get from fruits at index, if I is 0, get me the fruit of index 0, which will be apple. Then get me fruit of index 1, which will be banana, and then 2 is the cherry. So let's execute that. So you see it. You'll find here apple, banana, cherry, and then the other one, apple, banana, cherry. So those are two ways to do it. It just, this one is easier in that case, because I'm getting each one out and I can use it directly instead of referring to fruits of index I. But the two ways are right. Nothing is wrong with that. Let's try it. Let me put it for you in the chat. Another example is for the sets. And you'll find that it's similar idea. And we'll cover the sets and the list way more in depth when we go to the session. I defined here a set of integer. I said it's numbers, and I put here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I did the new set of type integer, and I'm doing the initialization here. I say here it's for each integer, and I would say the variable name for each is number of the set numbers printed for me. So let's run it. Okay, so number value here, it was saying that I cannot do it because at line 12, it says number is a reserved name, variable name. So here, number value instead. And I will execute. Here it printed for me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it went through one by one and printed for me the numbers. So that's how you can iterate through a list or set, and we'll cover it again when we discuss in depth like the lists and sets and see when to use each of them and what's the best practices for them. Now we have 15 minutes left, so I want to check like if anyone has any questions, we can go through it first. If not, we can try to cover the for loop for the SOQL in Apex. So any questions regarding what we covered in the session or previous sessions, or general questions?
Hey, Sally.
Yeah.
One thing that I always stumbled over when I was first messing around with this stuff was when you would use for eaches versus traditionals, right? You kind of talked about numbers, but like some of the, because you can do it kind of either way, but there's pluses and minuses to each. And I think one thing that's worth talking about is how, and you kind of see it when you first started the traditionals, how it's real easy to get messed up on which number, right? Do I go I less than 7, or do I go I less than equals 6, right? And if you start one off, you can get your numbers screwed up pretty easily on traditionals, where for eaches is a little more simpler in that regard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me rephrase it. So what Dave is saying is that here with the numbers, like the traditional for loops, especially if you're just starting with it, sometimes you get confused, like, should I go here less than or equal? Is it right if I say less than the size? Sometimes you can say, okay, let me go with, no, I need until it's less than or equal, not less than. And sometimes when you run this, you'll get out of index, out of bounds, because it tried to get from index 3, but the maximum we have is 0, 1, and 2, and the 3 is not there. So sometimes the traditional for loop will cause you trouble figuring out like the condition, the right condition to choose, the increments, or like you want, what should you do, +1 or plus or +2, or like sometimes it confuses people. So I think what Dave is referring to is that if you can use the loop, the enhance for loop, and go item by item in your list or set, that's safer, because you remove from your mind the hassle of thinking like, here, you see, I'm saying, get me each item in the list. I don't have to initialize. I don't have to put a condition. I don't have to increment. So whenever possible, usually people go with that. Whenever it's not possible, you start looking into the traditional for loop. Like one of the scenarios that maybe I can think of, that maybe you have a list of 50 students and you want to print the first 5 names, for example. So I know I don't want to go through the 5 of them, through the 50 to print the first 5. So maybe that will take you to the traditional. Even though we'll talk about it next time. I don't think we'll have time this time. We have a break and continue. You can use it with combination with the enhance for loop. But yeah, I think that's what you meant, right, Dave? Like the confusion.
Yeah, you did a better job of explaining traditionals. It's easy to get caught up on the numbering. It doesn't seem like it would be that hard, but you get screwed up and you're like, wait, is I equal 0? And then you think you got it right, and then it's tripping your loops left and right, or you're getting bad results from it. Whereas for eaches tend to be a little simpler as long as you're going, like you said, going through the full list.
Yeah. So it's essential, in my opinion, to know that the two exist and to get used and try to play with the developer console, at least for now, to see, okay, when I start with 2, what will happen? When I change the condition to something else, what will happen? Or when I change how I increment or decrement the value here, what's the impact? It's a good practice to do, so you can see the different parameters, how they change, how your for loop and output will be different in each scenario. And it's essential to know how to use the enhance for loop or the for each, because it's critical, and sometimes, or most of the time, like when you can use it, you go ahead and use it. So yeah, if you can use the for each or the enhance for loop, go for it. If not, you know how to do the traditional for loop as well. Any other questions? Okay, so let's try to cover quickly, if no questions. I can give you an idea about the SOQL and how it can be used. And because anyway, like we are not covering how to write SOQL statements now, but another way to use the for loops is when you start working a lot with SOQL statements, usually people take the result of the SOQL statement and put it in a list of accounts and then loop through them. Instead of that, you can loop directly in your SOQL statement, and that's usually preferable if you don't need to keep your accounts or values somewhere, or like if you have a lot of records, because the way it processes the records for you in the background, it batches the records, and it's more efficient with a lot of records. Let's try an example here and see how it works. SOQL for loops. So the SOQL statements are usually used to query results and return it. So let's say here and we'll go through it as well. Let me just do that. And I will go to the query editor. I will run my queries so you can see it. So it's a way to retrieve data. So here I'm getting the first, I'm getting 10 accounts from my org. So it's printing the ID. I'm saying what I need to get, the ID, and I need to get the name from the account, and I want to limit it to the first 10. So that's what the SOQL is for. It's used to retrieve data, and you will have to learn how to do it. And it's more complex than that. You can have like values coming from the parent, or you get the child records as well, how you can do ordering or filtering and stuff like that. But for now, I want to show you how to use it. Here, again, we have the for. If you remember, the syntax is the data type. The data type is that each account, I want to go through each account that is coming back. Like I have 10 accounts that are coming back. I want to look through each account, and I give it a name, like ECC here, and then colon in between the square brackets, I have my SOQL statements. What I'm doing here, that it will go get account by account that return from the SOQL statement, and I use it here. Like I want to show the account ID, so acc.id, and I want to show the name, so acc.name, and I print it. So let's see it in action. Here, when I do the debug, it shows the 10 accounts, and for each, we are printing the ID and we are printing the name. Why we call it the for loop for SOQL? Because we have the SOQL statement here. And other, like another way to do it would be that I do get here the SOQL. I want it will return a list of accounts. So I do list of accounts, and between square brackets, I have my SQL statement, and then I do the for each that we just did before, account, because this is a list of accounts. So the data type is account. And here I say account object from, that's the variable name. And then from the collection, my collection is list of accounts, and I can do the same here. And if I run, we'll get the same result. The only thing is that here we saved it first in a collection or a list of accounts, and then we loop through it. Here we can do the same, but directly from the SOQL statement without putting the results first in a list. That's preferred, especially if you don't need to have a list, like you are looping through the accounts to do something and you don't need to have the list of the accounts saved somewhere. And it's more efficient when you have a larger set of data that you want to retrieve. So that's the last type of for loops. Any questions about it? Okay, so I don't see questions in the chat as well. Let me put this in the chat for you. And don't worry about the SOQL and how to write the SOQL or more details about the list and sets. That would be a separate session. The thing that is remaining in the talk about the loops would be talking about how we can use break and the keyword continue. Those are like tricky in terms of if you don't know what they do or how they behave and you see it in the code, you may lose like the context of what's happening, or you don't know exactly what to expect to see. So I don't think I have time now because we have just 4 minutes. So I will leave that for the next session. What we will do is that we'll talk about the break and the continue and how to use them. We'll see how to use the break to exit the loop, and we'll see how we can use the continue to skip. And we'll try an example for the while loop using both continue and break. And we'll give an overview how to decide, or like what's the difference between the different types of loops and like when to use each of them. And ideally, like at the end, I have an exercise for you to work on for the loops. I put it here in the chat if you want to try. Like you can read a bit about the break and continue until next time, or you can refer to the video. You will see like brief explanation from the slides here. You can read it and try to work with it. So next session we'll start with the break and continue and give like a summary about all for the loops and when to use which one. If anyone will attempt to do the homework and have question next time, we can answer it. If not, we'll start talking about the next topic, which will be the complex data types, list sets, maps, and Salesforce. Any questions? I'm happy to help with any questions here. Okay. I will stop the recording and thank you so much for joining me today. And hopefully I will see you next session. And let me stop recording. Thank you.